So I'm soon going to be the oldest of 5 girls, and I grew up in New York City in a tiny but noisy one-bedroom apartment. And so I began to stake out my own little corner of the world through literature. And I fell in love with the marine environment through John Steinbeck's high-spirited adventures and Rachel Carson's meditative beachcombing, and I knew that I had to get out there to see and feel the marine environment for myself. In high school, I began applying for scholarships to do research, and the very first opportunity I had was to study marine mammal behavior in British Columbia. We spent 3 weeks sea kayaking through these remote and foggy coastal inlets, and one day my sea kayak partner and I were a bit ahead of the group, and we hear this choof, choof, echoing through the channel, and this fin begins to emerge from the glassy surface of the sea. It's so tall, it's as if I was standing on your back. And all of a sudden, there's an orca less than 7 feet in front of our kayak. And our camp counselors are frantically waving their oars, and they're yelling, "Amelia, get back here!" And I'm thinking, this is the greatest day of my life. And so I sat there in the wake of these crossing orcas. And then 2 days later, we lowered a hydrophone, an underwater microphone, to record the whales' singing voices, and I heard the low, melodious, echoing calls of a humpback whale and the echolocation of orcas for the first time, which sounds like muted machine gun fire, insonifying or lighting up through sound the whole of the boat. And I thought again, this is the greatest day of my life. I went to university, and I knew that I had to become a marine mammal biologist. But I got there, and to my dismay, I realized that the professor only wanted to work on marine snails, and he was retiring. And so I settled on the next best thing, which was wild chimpanzees, because they have these complex social structures, and they're constantly forming groups and splitting up, and they make social decisions. And I got to class on the first day, and the professor started her PowerPoint, and it was a video of dolphins, and I was just ecstatic. And she presses play, and it's maybe 20 different fins in the water. They're circling around each other, cutting each other off, really going nowhere. And she says, who would even want to study these? You can't even see what they're doing. But I thought, I do. And so I found a way the next summer to get to Samos to study dolphin behavior. And it was along this expedition that often after our research, we would have the opportunity to go snorkeling. And I remember these swims where I would feel the sunlight on my back and my breath jabbing up against my chest and hearing the bubbles escape from my mask. But everything was really quite muted and muffled, and that's because our ears just aren't built for hearing underwater. But again, a few days later, we lowered a hydrophone, and this rich and spectacular world just exploded around me. I heard the snap, crackle, pop of seagrass meadows photosynthesizing and the lightning rapidity pops of snapping shrimp. And since then, I've listened to hundreds of recordings of coral reef fish chorusing and warbling during moonlight hours. I knew that even if I couldn't study the marine environment in the way I wanted to, it was speaking to me, not through visual and behavioral surveys, but as an acoustic environment where sound can travel up to 5 times faster underwater and for much farther distances than in air without losing energy. I found my own way to keep learning about the sea and sharing my love for it with my professors and peers, and I started an interview series for our on-campus newspaper, and the very first person who I interviewed was Dr. Michael Moore. By the end of that series, I interviewed 8 of the scientists whose work I most admired, and that was my first taste of the kinds of research conducted at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Since then, I've had the extraordinary privilege of coming here straight out of my undergraduate degree, and I've learned some pretty extraordinary things. My colleagues have taught me how coral larvae can move towards sound like moths to a flame, and I've learned how to read sound pictorially based on the intensity of its hues, to do things like categorize dolphin whistles and get closer to understanding what they may be communicating. I've held on to secrets as my colleagues have published research that has rearranged our biological and evolutionary theories as we thought we knew them. One of our brilliant postdocs just published a study on the first ever documented production of sound in sharks. These are predators that we've been using as model species since the very beginning of the establishment of the Marine Biological Laboratory in Hui, but who we've always overlooked as being ghostly silent. 3 weeks ago, I had my very first opportunity to go to Sarasota and conduct health assessments on wild dolphins. And 2 weeks ago, I got to go to the United Nations Ocean Conference and speak to policymakers about what we risk losing in a rapidly industrialized acoustic ecology. This week, I'm a bit heartbroken because my contract as a guest investigator is ending here, but I know that wherever I go, I'll carry the same sense of wonder I felt that first day lowering the hydrophone, that there is an entire world speaking to us if we only learn how to listen. Thank you.